Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I'd like to go a little bit deeper into what I was talking about in the previous videos, sort of about this idea of developing sort of an experience of emptiness as a way of sort of expanding into being more of a philosophical being as opposed to a person, kind of getting away from sort of getting wrapped up in sort of how we feel about things and our personal interest, and sort of how do we accomplish sort of developing our identity as just a remote, kind of a remote located being, sort of a being that is not so full of the flesh of personhood and being a human and having personal human interests, kind of as a almost like a mental trick to sort of get ourselves sort of out of basically the basic orbit, that basic orbit of our just personal interests and how we feel about things. And so, I struggle to try to find the right metaphors for that. So I think of like being empty or just being a spiritual being or just a being as opposed to a person, just to kind of help expand that more abstract, remote sort of spirituality, to sort of just expand the camera setup so that I'm not just locating all my cameras just on where I have my personal interest. So, sorry. So, the idea is that, we don't want to abandon the part of us that has personal interest and personal feeling, but we do have to develop some kind of almost like witchcraft, almost like to set up like more cameras and more like conscience locators that are outside of just our personal interest. And for a lot of people, that can be very foreign territory because we're not used to sort of locating our selfhood sort of outside of our basic personhood. You know what I mean? And so it may, for some people, that may be a very foreign process, and it may be very kind of like exotic. It's like an exotic, it's almost like psychedelic process to sort of develop your identity sort of beyond just personhood and beyond just personal interest and human affairs and that kind of thing. So it's like very exotic and kind of psychedelic almost, Um, and I don't encourage people to do it in a creepy or unhealthy or weird way. I mean, always in a common sense, sort of non hocus pocus. I really do not believe in getting all supernatural and hokey and stuff. Just common sense, down home, just bologna sandwich way. Just kind of developing sort of the camera perspective, expanding our perspective. Okay, so I use terms because I need assistance. I need like tricks. So I need to use like metaphorical, poetic tricks. So I think of emptiness. And I said in the last video, maybe emptiness is a lazy, maybe not a very precise metaphor, and maybe there are better metaphors. So I was thinking about it, and so it occurred to me that maybe a better metaphor is being lean, like a lean operator. Okay, and like being an operator, it's kind of like when you think of being an operator, it sort of gives you sort of the poetic sensation of just not having a lot of indulgence in your feelings and just being more in operations. Okay, and in a sense, you might think we could even apply like almost like self-esteem to that, in the sense that we could almost be proud, in a sense, proud, not in a egotistical way, but just proud in the sense that we we're sort of comfortable that it's a good way to be. You know what I mean? We're comfortable that it's a good way to be, that just to be a lean operator, where you're just sort of giving up all your personal interests and your personal sensitivities, and you're just extending yourself out in the world to be a lean operator. You know what I mean? And so it almost has like a romantic quality where you're just kind of giving up all your personal interests to be just in operations in the world. And there is kind of a romance to that, almost like yeah, it's hard to explain, but it's like seems like a noble way to operate. And of course, you don't have to, like, I'll never confuse myself with being a perfect lean operator, because I'm not a perfect lean operator, but it's a nice ideal. And I guess I can be mature enough not to confuse my efforts with actually being an ideal lean operator. It's just an inspiring metaphor, okay, that I'll never reach 100%, but that inspiration can sort of give me the juice to want to operate, in the world as lean as possible and just as an operator, because I'm just giving up all my concern about, what's my self-interest, what am I going to get out of it, and my focus more is on being a good lean operator. And you can look at it almost as an artistic endeavor, to try to get as close to that as possible, even though we'll never reach it completely. But it's a striving and it's a motivation. Okay. And there is something kind of romantic about, being able to, I don't know, I think of like the old pilots, the old pilots that flew in bad weather without radar, flying the mail at night back when navigation was very crude. It was very heroic, these people risking their lives and just, with machinery. They had to even, I think they even had to do maintenance on their engines and, just I don't know. There's something kind of, I guess it's kind of macho, but in a way, it's sort of like, just giving up all your creature comforts just to do the mission, basically. If you think of it that way. And I think even women, I don't think it's just a masculine thing. I think even women can sometimes find this joy. It's like well, it's not a joy, but there is a nobility to it. And you feel like you're participating in something very noble by just being an effective operator and being lean in the sense that, poetically, that you're lean in terms of just not having a lot of indulgence in your personal interest and what am I going to get out of it, just the pure operations in the world. And that is a kind of leanness, that's like being lean. And I think there is something to the aesthetic of being as lean as possible. It's something like it's just weird. I think psychologically, maybe that's why there was a time in our fashion when we would appreciate models who were very thin. I don't mean anorexic, I just mean thin, because I think psychologically we just kind of understand that as just getting down to business, and there's a certain beauty to it. And I think people, no matter how ugly naturally a person may be, because some people are not beautiful, but I think as we get leaner, I think we process that as being more noble and therefore maybe not more attractive, but maybe more beautiful and maybe in kind of a more philosophical way. So, I think I don't encourage anybody to get creepy and pathological with this. Okay. So in a common sense way, without getting all weird, we really have to be careful not to get weird. And that does take discipline, not to get so obsessed with leanness that we cross the line into some kind of, perverse, anorexic, whatever. And so we have to really watch that, but, take it on in a mature way that being lean and being an operator, that may be a good metaphor to give us motivation to sort of approach the world in a way where we're kind of setting our camera network and our consciousness and our sort of our perspective sort of outside just personal interest. You know what I mean? And I think if you set up the cameras kind of broad, that allows us to kind of get out of that inner orbit of just personal interest and personal feelings, so that we can actually have space to be the lean operator. The lean operator. Okay, so when I say lean operator, doesn't that sound a lot like the operating Thetan that you hear from like Scientology? And also related to Scientology, I know there's other self-help groups like Landmark Education and things where they talk about just basically, if I can recall, it's basically, the whole world is just empty and meaningless. And basically you're just reduced just to basically just operating in the world, so it's kind of like the operating Thetan, basically. And so why would my idea of a lean operator, why would maybe that not be the same thing as like say an operating Thetan, or maybe the empty and meaningless operations that come from like Landmark Education and stuff like that? What's the difference? Okay, well, they look the same, from kind of without getting too close, but why would I distinguish? Okay, well, the first observation I have with, like, say, the operating Thetan from the Scientologies is I think that I don't think it's a true lean operator. Okay, I think they're confused in Scientology. Okay, because if they were really so lean, and if they were really just an operating spirit, okay, basically just pure operation, okay, I think they would have to address the fact that they do have a very big personal interest, a very big like very big. I would call it very fleshy, very fleshy in the sense that they are very attached to the glory and the, I guess, how would you say, like, it's like the glory. It's like the glory of their own ideology. Okay. In other words, I think that I think that in Scientology, I think like say belonging as a Scientologist and being a Scientologist and having all their ideology and all their kind of like bureaucratic ideology, I think that's a lot of flesh. I don't think that's really lean. Okay, so in a way, I think that their operating Thetan is a contradiction because they have the ideal of being very lean, but they don't see somehow that they're full of themselves. Okay, and they're very inflated. All right, with all the glory and all the I don't know the fanfare around their ideology, basically, being associated with Scientology and having this outrageous, inflated, bureaucratic fantasy, this kind of like this kind of like I don't know, it's like a bureaucratic, it's like an ethos, it's like a I don't know how to say it. It's like a religious culture, basically, and so they're sort of attached to that religious culture, and I think I see that with the Mormons as well. That they're so attached to the benefits and the glory and the grandiosity of their religious culture that they're really not really lean operators. Okay, to me, a lean operator would even give up even the idea that they have knowledge of how the world works. Okay, like for example, like a Mormon or a Scientology, they actually are full of themselves by thinking that they know how the world works and they know how people work and they know how the universe is and they know how old it is. And so they've sort of taken away the uncertainty and the coldness, the unprotectedness of maybe not knowing how exactly the universe works, maybe not knowing how many years old the universe is. Maybe, I think the true lean operator is more alone in the world and maybe doesn't have all those creature comforts of the big religious, how would you say, it's like the comfort of being attached to a big, powerful religion. You know what I mean? So in a sense, I think that the operating Thetan of the Scientologists is actually kind of a contradiction in the sense that they fantasize about being, I think they imagine themselves to be just a pure operator. Okay, but they're not really pure and they're not really lean because they've got all the baggage of that religion, all the glory of their religion, and all the grandiosity of thinking that they understand all kinds of things. And so they take away from themselves the real skinniness, the real leanness of maybe not knowing how things work and just getting out there in the world in more of a vertigo that you don't have all the answers. Okay, and you don't have the security, okay, of having that big religious club that sort of like defends you and like you're a part of and whatever. So that to me is a kind of a fleshy, kind of a big fat. It's like being fat. It's like having an inflated self. I think the lean operator goes out in the world without really knowing exactly how the world is, accepting the mysteries of the world, and just operating without getting all fat with how much knowledge you have or how much how whether you're associated with some powerful religion or whatever, and just being just an operator without all the fluff and the fluff. And so I think that all of L. Ron Hubbard's, concepts about how the world is and how a good bureaucracy should be run and all that, I think that's just fluff. And so it really adds so much fluff that you're not really just a pure operator. You know what I mean? I think just being an operator means that, all the things that could fill you personally, that could give you personal inflation, personal gratification, please. I mean, there's so much in the Mormon church and in Scientology that just fill people with gratification. This idea like, oh, me and my family, we're going to live forever in the afterlife and we know exactly what's going to happen after death. That's just filling yourself with all kinds of inflation, gratification inflation, that to me is not just being a lean operator, where you're just in an empty universe in a sense. I mean, I say that poetically, but empty in terms of our assessment of it, right? Where you're just thrown out into the world, okay? And you don't really know exactly, you don't have an account, a satisfaction of having a full account. It's just the mystery of the world, but you go out there skinny and unprotected and basically just operate, okay? And so that to me is a more pure, like less inflated way. And so that's a way of kind of getting outside of that orbit of just self gratification and how things feel for us personally. So in a sense, I think that Scientology and Mormonism and things like that, they're actually very self-inflated. There's just a lot of gratification inflation. And so even though they try to strive to be just pure spiritual operators, they just don't realize how fat they are, how fleshy they are with this kind of this this sort of like fatness of just gratification and sensation and being, kind of, in a way, it has to do with how we feel personal, having personal interest and personal gratification, because they have ideological gratification, and they have the gratification of belonging to sort of a big explanation of the whole universe, as opposed to just being truly just a pure operator where you don't have any answers really. You're just out there operating basically. And that gets you out of the space of personal gratification. Okay. And I know a lot of what I'm saying is kind of, I'm throwing in a lot of ideas without really explaining everything. Because I mean, I could parse every millimeter of what I'm trying to say, but basically, um, I think if we reflect on it, okay, being like heavily associated with a religion that has a lot of explanations, I think that is tied to personal gratification, okay, and it does tend to take away that level of insecurity that may be you know that may be necessary to have a true leanness in our and just being a pure operator just out in the world, that we're just we're not so full of a lot of, like, say, satisfactory accounts of the universe and the afterlife, or what spirituality is, whether our spirit is so disembodied and so independent that it could inhabit another body later, and just all this. I would call it bullshit, because it is just bullshit, because it's just a lot of explanatory garbage that we can't prove, and all it does is just serve in a way to take away basic existential insecurity and just kind of fill us with a kind of gratification. And I think what that does is that holds us in the orbit, that tight orbit of personal gratification, even when we think we're operating as a lean entity, basically. Um, so I think I like to think of, just take away all the garbage about explaining the world and how much we know, and just go out there and observe and interact with the world as just a lean operator, and just have as little flesh on you to just get out there and operate. Okay, but here's the problem with that. Okay, whatever philosophy we have, whatever ideal we have of, like, say, a noble way to operate, um, and everything we do in the world is kind of a reflection of a personal philosophy. And if we don't have a philosophy, the way we operate is a reflection of our default philosophy. So even if we don't reflect and like, say, even if we don't reflect and sort of develop our own personal outlook and our own personal sort of account of life, or our own personal, like, say, philosophical perspective, we're going to express a default perspective. Okay, and the default perspective probably will be, even though we don't set a constitution for our lives and draft sort of like our principles of how we want to live our lives, we're going to express a philosophy anyway. Okay, and for most people, that's going to be, even though they don't have it written down, okay, effectively, as they operate in the world, they're going to say that they put like 75% of importance on how they feel, okay, and also like on their gratification levels, or tending to their own issues, even like, say, tending to how they're not gratified, and sort of being focused on how gratified or ungratified they are, and that personal, like, human personal, um how would I say, like, being, like, say, 75 to 80% caught up in how I'm feeling, how I'm doing, and how things are on the human personal level, as opposed to more expanded. So even if you don't have that written down and you haven't thought about it and you haven't developed and reflected, effectively, that is the philosophy of people. Most people, that they're just mostly concerned with their level of gratification, whether it's positive or negative. Okay. And so if you don't, like, say, if you're not interested in philosophy, and you don't actually bother to develop a philosophy of life, you're going to have one anyway. Okay, because we all, effectively, as we operate, we reflect our own personal constitution. And so either we sort of develop a philosophy and try to live by it, or we already have a philosophy and we're just not even aware of it. Okay, but we still have it. All right, so a human being will always follow some kind of constitution. Either that constitution sort of drives us and controls us, or we develop a constitution to try to maybe make more of a craft of our lives and maybe get beyond, like, say, our default constitution, which I think is essentially kind of narcissistic, because if we don't really think about it, And if most of our concerns in our operations reflect, sort of being engrossed in, how we feel, how gratified we are, effectively we are expressing a constitution. We just haven't, let's say, we haven't really, how would you say, we haven't really personally developed it. It's sort of we're sort of born with it. We're sort of it sort of carries us instead of us carrying it. You know what I mean? So I think the level of agency in a person who hasn't like sat down to try to develop their constitution, or they just kind of fit into, like, say, a person who just sort of fits into their, basically, fits into the constitution of what's around them. You know what I mean? Like, say, if you just, I don't know, if you just sort of fit into what other people are doing, and what the example that other people are showing you, you haven't really, you don't really, you may have agency in how you operate, but you don't have agency in the constitution of your life. You know what I mean? Sort of like our philosophies are like the constitutions of our lives. I say the constitution like a government's constitution. You know what I mean? And so if we are, all of us are governments of ourselves, of our personal lives, you know, all of us have a constitution that we follow. Some of us sort of absorb the constitution that's around us, like other people around us, and or we just follow the constitution of our natural state without, like, say, having reflection and agency about it. So all of us are following some kind of constitution, okay? But the question is, how much agency do we have, not just in how we operate, but how much agency do we have in the constitution that we have? You know what I mean? Okay, so those are all interesting things. And so, I guess if emptiness is not the best metaphor, then maybe a better metaphor would be the lean operator. It's just an idea, but it's a way of getting beyond just the default constitution of being overly absorbed and overly wrapped up in just basically our gratification status, basically. You know what I mean? And so if we're going to get beyond that sort of default constitution of gratification status or just fitting in to what other people are doing, then we're going to have more agency in our personal constitution. Okay. But then you have a real problem, which is, how do you actually deploy it? Okay. Can a person, if I think, oh yeah, I'd love to be a lean operator. Okay. Well, how do you actually become a lean operator? All right. How do you actually become? Do you just like the idea and then just start doing it? Well, I think the bad news is that no, you can't just do that. In other words, this is the difficult part. Just because you like a philosophical idea and you think, oh, I agree with that, or I want to be that, you cannot just be what you think is good. It doesn't work like that. Philosophy cannot be actually enacted in the world, okay, through just agreement and just just saying, like, oh, I subscribe to that idea. Just subscribing to an idea and just agreeing with it and maybe wanting to have it, it's not enough. You can't just purely philosophize yourself to have a way of being. It doesn't work like that, because our way of being actually is like a biological, neurological condition. Okay. So, for example, it's the same thing. Like, say, if I see somebody running a marathon, I think, oh my God, I would love to be a marathon runner. Well, I just cannot run a marathon. Okay. Because running a marathon is not just wanting to run a marathon. If you don't have a very, very extensive conditioning of your body, like, say, if your heart and lungs and your whole musculature and your whole metabolism and the way you produce, like, say, amino acid, or what is it? The way you produce different acids in your body. I'm not sure exactly all the acids, but basically, if you're not conditioned metabolically for very long distance running, then even if you love the idea of being a marathon runner and you love even the philosophy of being a marathon runner and you just want to do that, you cannot do it. You have to go through a transformation that may take years, and maybe some people will never get there, where you sort of transform yourself into a person who could run a marathon. Okay, so it's the same thing for any lean operation in the world. Okay, if you don't have that metabolic condition, okay, you, just because you like the philosophy and just because you agree with the philosophy or you think it's wonderful, you absolutely cannot do it until you slowly condition yourself to become that thing. Okay. And so I personally think that when we like philosophies and when we agree with philosophies, we have to fully understand that we cannot participate in those philosophies until we take a very step by step transformation of our whole metabolism, okay, to actually become an agent in that philosophy. Okay, so like I personally like, I guess, aesthetically and maybe philosophically, I appreciate and I subscribe to personally, like say being the empty or the lean operator. Okay. And the idea is I know that doesn't mean that I'm going to become a nothing person. Okay. I know I'm not going to be emptying out totally my own personality. But what it is that when you use the emptiness and you use the leanness, okay, as a way to sort of get outside of your basic gratification orbit, okay, what you're going to do is you're not going to lose your personality. It may feel that way, but what you're going to do is you're going to become a better personality. In other words, it's kind of the same as when a person gets thinner, okay, thinner like in a healthy way, not anorexic, okay. A lot of people now, when people get too skinny, they go too far, they actually become less attractive. They actually are not beautiful, okay. But when a person develops a leanness that's right, like say at the healthy level, okay, when a person gets leaner, a lot of times they do become more beautiful, okay. So in a sense, when you use this emptiness and this leanness and all this garbage, I mean, it's all just a bunch of metaphorical crap. But when you use these devices and you actually transform yourself into these different ideals, okay, you can, in a sense, your personality can become, I guess, more slimmed down, and it can become tighter, and I guess more and better resolution. It's like you take the blurriness out of your personality, and in a way, your personality becomes sharper and more defined and more beautiful. So, in a sense, by using this emptiness and this sense of kind of getting outside yourself and sort of getting less in the orbit of yourself, you're not actually destroying or disappearing the self. You may actually indirectly be making the actual self and your personality more defined and more beautiful. Okay, but you have to kind of use these like out of body metaphors as a way of kind of slimming down and sharpening the actual personality character that you have. So maybe a lot of us suffer from maybe the sickness of being too blurry and too inflated. Okay, so maybe the idea of having an inflated personality is kind of in a way what the ego is, right? Okay, so maybe very blurry, very inflated. Okay, and so by using all these tricks and metaphors and kind of getting outside yourself and then actually transforming yourself to actually adapt to whatever philosophy you want, where it's like learning how to run a marathon. You have to actually change your whole metabolism so that you're able to be let's say a lean operator. Okay, when you do that, you're really not destroying your prior personality. What you're doing is you're taking away the inflation and the blurriness of your personality so it can be more sharp and more in resolution and more beautiful in a way. Okay, now you don't want to be like vain about it, like, oh, that's the reason why I do it. And that's the whole thing. If that's the reason why you do it, you're just going to reinflate yourself. You know what I mean? So you have to really get out of that. Oh, my goal is to be beautiful. Okay, really. And that's why you get into the emptiness. That's why you get into the pure lean operator, where you just give up all interest. Because as long as you have some residual interest in how beautiful you're going to be or whatever, then you just screwed up your thing, and you're now reinflated in gratification. So in a way, you have to use almost like I would say you have to use kind of paradoxically, to actually be more beautiful and to be a better person. You have to completely give it up. You're not really giving up being a person, you're just giving up your concerns with it. You know what I mean? So this emptiness, it's all metaphorical. You're not actually giving up yourself, you're just giving up your concern. You're giving up the inflation, which is, oh, how beautiful will I be, or what's the result of how I'm going to look. You give that all up. You become empty to that, and you become a pure lean operator in the world, where you're just an operating spirit, basically. I mean, I hate using the Scientology thing because they're so full of themselves. Actually, they're not really pure operating lean operators, and they're not. They're way too full of they're too inflated with their gratification in Scientology, right? So they're not actually achieving their ideal. Okay. Anyway, so I'll make another video on this to keep talking, because I think it's so important, this idea of transforming ourselves metabolically, okay, and that we cannot just be what we want to be. Absolutely not. Having a philosophy is not enough. You have to transform. Okay, so part two will come.